Hey there, welcome to episode 162 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I'm your host, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 11:18 p.m. on Monday, March 23, 2026. We normally publish new episodes on Tuesdays, so we're just ahead of schedule, which is always nice. A rarity. Pardon my voice. I don't know if I think it's the weather. It's always the weather. The weather in Vegas is never kind to me and my speaking voice. Unless I'm at a trade show or something, I need to speak all day continuously and loudly. Otherwise, it atrophies, I guess. But anyway, so we'll see if we can make it through all this. Today's episode, which is titled Innovation Culture Upsides. Innovate. Yeah, it's right there in our name. Nice. If you're not familiar with the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, we are a Nevada nonprofit corporation, a 501c3 public charity. We are in our fourth year. We are currently experiencing the Civic Volunteer Winter, which is not limited to Vegas, but certainly is exemplified in Vegas, which essentially means we have zero participation and zero interest expressed by people. I like to describe it as the Top Gun Maverick problem. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody thinks they can do it. Nobody is interested until, in this case, as was the case in that movie, one person goes ahead and does it and says, you can do it. Here's what's possible. So that's been my mode of operation for the past few months during this Civic Volunteer Winter. But the innovation culture plays a role, is a factor, and that's what we'll talk about today. We formed in June of 2022, got our determination in October of 2022. It was a 1023 EZ, in case you're curious as to why it was so quick. And we are in our fourth year, so we no longer have a gross receipts cap. Sky's the limit. We do focus on, and in fact, our purpose statement is to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. I'm normally not a fan of the use of the community word, but in this case, it's specifically apropos. I think people hang too much meaning on that word, but in the strictest sense, community elevation is what we are aiming for, along with job skills development and cultivation of our culture of innovation here in the greater Vegas area. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a brief summary, which is, I think, one very long sentence. Oh, no, it's technically two. There's 6 words in the second sentence. I will read that to you. We have the usual 2 links. I was thinking of throwing in a couple of links, but I'm curious to know whether people actually click on those links. So I'll have to figure that out at some point. I don't really want to know that badly, so I'm not going to do analytics links like bit.ly is one way to do that, or basically you click on the link and it redirects and it counts, and it's invasive. So I'd rather not, but I am curious. At some point I will try to ask to see what the interest level is in those, and I do this across all of my audio programs, of which there are several, so I would like to know. But anyway, it's just the usual 2, so let's get started. I don't know if we'll finish by midnight, but we'll find out. It's 11:22 now. We're 4 minutes in or so. On that note, the summary of today's episode: our purpose statement is fairly clear and specifically vague, but one of our missions is to cultivate a culture of innovation in the greater Vegas area through collaborative pursuit of community elevating initiatives by civic volunteers. Why is this a good idea? So I think I told you what our purpose statement is. One of our missions is to cultivate a culture of innovation. So I think I covered all that suitably. Our homepage for volunteers and descriptions of what we're working on and so on, I call it our activity site, innovateforvegas.org, innovate F-O-R, Vegas, no space, and then a period, and then O-R-G. Our original website from the old days, codeforvegas.org, same idea. So innovateforvegas.org, if we happen to have people participating, they will have little circular profile pics attached here and there, and a general rundown on what we're trying to accomplish. So the sort of public facing, interesting part of what we're trying to accomplish is at that site. Then we have our foundation website, Innovate for Vegas Foundation. So same spelling, Innovate, F-O-R, Vegas, and then a period, and then foundation, just like it sounds. And I mentioned we are a Nevada nonprofit corporation. We're a 501c3 public charity. So the .foundation version is where board members, by the way, we're still looking for board members to join this adventure. Board members, bylaws, finances, financial transactions, donations, expenditures, etc. There isn't much there right now because, again, we are in the winter. But eventually, especially if we get some new directors to join the effort, there will be a nice big overhaul of the Innovate for Vegas .foundation website. But so that's the business side of the coin, if you like. InnovateForVegas.org is the people side. So it's a nice time for retrospection right now, and then we'll get into the beef, the meat, the main part of the show. I don't look back too often to consider some of the historical and relevant stuff that we are trying to implement here in Vegas in the modern day. So today is your lucky day, whenever you're listening to this episode. So it could be on the 24th when we publish it, or it could be on the 24th of some other month in the future. Who knows? Who can say? As Simon Sinek says, and if you're not familiar with Simon Sinek, where have you been? As Simon Sinek says, and he has titled his first book this, start with why, and in our case, that is rooted in past positivity, at least in my case, and I want to share. That sentence was too long, but I am want to do that as well. As I've mentioned here and there in this audio program and in real life, I have a degree in engineering from Harvey Mudd College in Southern California, Claremont, in fact. And then about 30 years, a little bit more actually, of industry experience pursuing various goals, most of them largely within my academic focus of engineering or technology development and so on. But many of my pursuits are adjacent or completely outside of my academic background, keeping it interesting. While I have always been interested in interesting, I always mix up interested and interesting because they're sort of the same. Ooh. Well, we might touch on that today. I've always been interested in technology, especially computer technology, but also the majesty of flight. I've found over the years that thinking about other topics with this mindset has been handy, useful even, and I have come to appreciate what I call the innovative thinking idea. There are probably other labels that would fit, but we may as well start with fitting this into all the other things, fitting it all together right now. So, innovative thinking, Innovate for Vegas, innovation culture. It all fits, sort of. It will. Not during this podcast, but someday. I was initially really set on joining the U.S. Air Force to become a pilot, my interest in the majesty of flight, after all. But as my eyesight was not going to be 20/20 in line with the pilot requirements of the day, that had to be uncorrected, no surgeries allowed and whatnot, I think that's been loosened substantially over the years. This was a long time ago. I leaned into my other interests, which I started really leaning into when I was 11 years old. In the 6th grade, I was the bored kid in class sent to go, quote, play with the new computers, which were Atari 800 computers, in fact, if you remember those days. About 6 years later, I would select my second choice, computer technology, and pursue engineering at Harvey Mudd College, which was around that time one of the greatest or highest ranked technical colleges in the country. It was certainly, in the top 5. U.S. News and World Reports would rank schools. So this among tech, especially engineering, was fairly high ranked. I mean, it was in the ballpark of an MIT or a Caltech, Harvey Mudd. There were several. In fact, I've told this story in the Quaggling Sand audio program. The reason I went to Harvey Mudd, I can attribute in part to my high school guidance counselor, Alan Osborne, who, when we had our, parent conference, I suppose, we were sitting in his office, and he said, "Well, you're ahead of math. You're gonna run out of math here at the Sunny Slope High School. So if you're interested in math or science or engineering or whatever, then maybe you should look at a school like MIT or Caltech or Harvey Mudd." And I remember saying, "Harvey Mudd, what's that? I'd never heard of it." because it's a very small school. It still kind of is. So that's how I ended up there. So I didn't go there because it was highly ranked. I literally went there because it sounded interesting. I actually found their program unusual, and the class sizes, the small class sizes, were appealing to me, and it was a pretty good fit for me. I don't know if that would be true for others, but I wasn't advising you. So for me, it was pretty good. Although I have pondered, since I did get to experience people from MIT and Caltech in my travels, from what I learned from them about their academic travels and travails, that probably MIT would have been a pretty good fit for me also, but maybe not. Not sure. But Harvey Mudd was fine. It was actually, it was good. It was good for me, and this choice did shape my views over the years when it comes to today's topic. So I think going to a lesser known school that was, for example, Harvey Mudd had 100% teacher taught classes, no teacher assistants, no grad students teaching. So it was 100% professorial instruction, which is probably interesting to me. So anything and everything, though, that's what I like. So now, one of the appeals of the Harvey Mudd program was, and maybe still is, the diversity of study with only some of the course load in a particular concentration. Even though I was pursuing an engineering degree not for computer engineering, but actually just a general engineering degree, which is what Harvey Mudd was offering. And I think that's still true. I don't know if they've broken it out into more specific concentrations. And I had a minor concentration in economics, so general economics. We also filled our courses, our required courses, required for graduation, no matter what your major and concentrations and all that were, with chemistry, physics, biology, engineering, philosophy, psychology, history, economics, and a buffet of learning, perhaps. There were probably other topics, and I certainly had a nice variety of classes. And Harvey Mudd, as a member of the Claremont colleges, enabled us to take classes at other campuses. You'd encounter other people with other interests and other ways of approaching what they wanted to accomplish. So, as I'll paraphrase Mark Twain, don't let your classes get in the way of your education. With my concentration areas, engineering and economics, I took more engineering and economics classes than the other subject areas, but suffice to say, this diversity of inputs into my head with the classes that fit 2 semesters into one, which was one of Harvey Mudd's claims to fame. So you were learning basically twice as much, or you were supposed to, as a normal school. And I did take summer classes between my sophomore and junior years of school. And I can say that was true. Yeah, it was true. Mudd was moving. We were always moving, and but fast. We were cranking through the material. One thing about institutions of learning, particularly higher learning, is that anyone is essentially surrounded by people in a similar boat. Compulsory education can be hit or miss here. So when you're in elementary or high school, junior high school, you may or may not be sitting in a classroom full of people who want to be there or who want to learn. Sometimes not 100% of the people there want to be there. But once one decides to head off to college or pursue other special training, vocational schools, or whatever the case, most, if not all, rooms are filled with people who want to be there, right? If they stop wanting to be there, they can leave. There's no compulsion, maybe social or parental pressures, but generally speaking, you are not compelled to attend college. If it's not for you, it's not for you. You can change, you can go to a different school, etc. So the people that you encounter and you're surrounded with want to learn. They want to be there, or mostly. When I was in college, the first year, definitely, and then into the second year, there was definitely people who decided this was not for them. At Mudd, all first-year students were required to live on campus, and I lived on campus for all 4 of my years at Harvey Mudd, which means we remained immersed in what I will call a culture of innovation 24/7. Stick a pin in that. We will come back to this shortly. Now, I was probably a polymath then. That's someone with broad knowledge or learning across many topics, which is the simplest definition. you can probably come up with more detailed, somebody who's expert or whatever. But I have many interests, and I have many interests, and I've learned a lot over the years, including in college, but not limited to college. For a large fraction of my 18 years on arriving at Mudd, so I was a polymath when I got there, but the course load, the culture, and the scope and grandeur of the goals we all had for our near-term careers and such were such that everything sort of reinforced everything else, like feedback when your microphone gets too near your speakers. My alma mater was, and probably still is, known for teaching students how to learn across a wide range of topics, with research, ideation, innovation, and lateral thinking among the tools we worked on for at least 4 years. In my case, it's been the whole time. So this is to say, if I entered a polymath, I certainly exited my school years, my academic years, more of a polymath, and I've only been adding to that. What would I call that? Maybe a library, a bookshelf. I don't know. What do I call that? A ledger. The ledger has grown over the years of my interests and how much I've learned about them and how they fit together and so on. But enough about me. The culture of innovation at scale. So our small school was small. My class size was 151 students on the first day, and I think it was 118 for graduation 4 years later. The entire student body was capped at 800 people back then, if memory serves, and we were not quite that large. Now, in modern days, since that time, the charter maximum has increased. I think it's probably 1,000. I think the class sizes are between 900 and 950 or something. And as has the diversity of course offerings and the availability of on-campus student housing, so there was just more room for more people to learn more things. That's how evolution works, I suppose. When I landed in Silicon Valley, just about almost exactly 2 months after graduation, and this was a time of angst with the Bush recession, a thing at the time, so getting jobs was a little tricky. I was a little bit worried as July began. We graduated in mid-May, but by July 17th, I was heading to Silicon Valley. I found myself surrounded by a lot of people who were actually excited by possibility when I got to Silicon Valley, which was not too far off from what I was living with for 4 years in college. Now, again, I went to a fairly nerdy school, but this doesn't mean that wherever you went to school or wherever you went for more learning or even your first job or second job, whenever, you start to see, oh, this is the workaday world, and you're either going to run into people who may or may not be so into this, or you're going to be surrounded, as I was, with people who are all about it. Now, this quality of, or the culture, I suppose, was not quite as uniformly spread across the population I encountered for the first several months when I was in Silicon Valley. I had one job from July until October. I got laid off. Then I had another job for a couple of weeks, a little temp job, and then I started working at Apple for almost a year as a contractor. Apple was at the time my goal, and then once I worked there, it was not my goal anymore. But so say call it the first year or so, I was encountering a lot of people that were interested and interesting. Ooh, there's that pair of words. It was definitely an exciting place with nobody had any idea, no real idea what was to unfold over the next 7 years or so. So from 1993 until 2000-ish. Now, with so much happening in Silicon Valley in that time frame, it was relatively easy to get jobs, which was convenient because it was also a relatively unstable place. I mentioned I was laid off in started July, whatever it was, 17th. I think 17th was when I moved, but mid-July-ish, and then I was done on October 1st, a couple of months. And that was a surprise, but I realized from that experience that you should always be looking for your next job the moment you begin a new job. And that was a good attitude to have back then. I would tell people that I was still on a semester timeline, changing jobs at least once, often twice each year for a while. Layoffs, bad fit, weird project pivots. There were several reasons for change, which always led to something else that was at least as interesting, often more interesting. So this was actually a good fit for me. Because I was able to learn a tremendous amount every time I changed jobs. So every time I learned something, or every time I took a new job, I was learning something new. I used to tell people I'd rather do something I've never done before. And during that time in Silicon Valley, that was an absolute possibility. Nowadays, if you tell someone that, they're like, get out of here. I need someone who was doing exactly what's in the job description because that's what the person who just left was doing, and you're going to be sitting in their chair. I should point out this was in the time before LinkedIn, so keeping track of former colleagues was a matter of passing resumes around and vice versa. So, hey, is anyone hiring, or do you know someone? You'd be out and about, you'd run into a former colleague, they're at a new job. Hey, where are you working now? That kind of thing. So you'd pass resumes around, or you'd pass referrals, or hey, here's my card, or all that. Like a lot more personable. The good old days. This has been all but forgotten in the modern day. Unfortunately, now it's AI generated resumes, AI generated job descriptions, AI comparing the two, and LinkedIn somehow standing in the middle of all of it, getting in the way, if you ask me. Now, not everyone was of this ilk. No, not everyone was into innovation and interestingness. But there were an awful lot of people who were probably polymaths, or at least interesting and interested. There's that pair again. Across several domains, such that, and this was not an uncommon thing. I did it. We all did it at some point. Coworkers and former coworkers were the first to call on with a startup idea, sort of a, hey, do you want to try to do this? Do you want to get in on this? Are you thinking about leaving your current job? Or, hey, we should leave and start our own company, that kind of stuff. Whatever this was, right? Whatever this idea could have been. The term startup guy was common and, of course, inappropriate in a region with tons of startup people. So, unfortunately, the gender gap was real, all that stuff. But in the time of modernity, let's say startup people, there are many people of all walks and wheels and shapes, sizes, everything, all of it. So, startup people. We can talk about the various social failings that persist today in some corners where people still think startup guy is more appropriate. It's not. But suffice to say for now that the odds of running into someone who would at least be curious to know about a startup idea were pretty close to 100% in Silicon Valley between 1993 and 2000. We need to put a pin in this? No, we don't, because we have arrived where the pin will be removed. So what is a culture of innovation then? Right? You're going to find it on some college campuses or some academic institutions. Maybe they're not academic. You're going to run into this in certain places if there's a small concentration. And I always use Eureka, the sci-fi channel series, as an example of like an entire city, a small city, a town that has this culture of innovation. That was a weird sort of excessive take on this. But just imagine if you're walking down the street and like almost, if not everyone you run into is working on something crazy, scientific or earth-changing, completely innovative, of course, something novel, exploiting some newly discovered properties of whatever. So in my school, it was almost like that. So you're pretty close. When I arrived at Silicon Valley, I was finding this intermingled with normal people, quote unquote normal people. So if you flip through books or read blog posts or watch YouTube videos about economic development or building startup communities or similar, this is a different topic that I just covered in Cafe Genius Impresarios last week, building startup communities, community versus ecosystem. If you want to check that out, you may find definitions of what a culture of innovation is, possibly using a different label, but culture of innovation, some people have a checklist and they have like a safety, that is, you can express ideas without being made fun of or without people stealing your ideas and whatnot. You can be very specific in those ways, and then you may try to check off items like, do we have a culture of innovation yet? I don't have a specific example, or I don't have a specific set of qualifications to provide as in like, here's an example of a culture of innovation that is complete, right? So I don't know about those notions. Somebody may try to describe that to you, and they may call it something else, but they will have a way to describe and define it, how to know if you're in one, and possibly how you can make one or build one, which I contend cannot really be done with communities or with ecosystems. So your culture of innovation is kind of an emergent property of where you are and who you spend time with. But you can listen to the Cafe Genius Impresarios episode from last week if you want to hear more about ecosystem and community differences. So community versus ecosystems, and why we can't really build them, at least not easily. And that's my take. I'm sure somebody will argue with me, and go ahead. We can argue if you want. So I'm gonna provide my take on this, an illustrative, take your pick, anecdote, which actually happened twice, and so makes what I believe is an essentially perfect example pair for my take on culture of innovation. When I was living and working in Silicon Valley in the latter half of my first tour there, so remember I moved away from Silicon Valley in 2001, just in time for the 9/11 stuff, so that kind of threw a wrench in my big plans. And then I moved back to Silicon Valley in 2005 to follow a second version of my journey in such a place, and I moved to Vegas in 2013 after a house fire. So yeah, my end of tour stories for Silicon Valley are catastrophic. I was sitting in a crowded Starbucks in Santa Clara, and if you're curious, the Mercado Center, where I think it was it was along the 101 freeway, and it was east of, and the 101 is sort of runs east and west, so you have to kind of fake the orientation. But it was on the Santa Clara side of Lawrence Expressway, I think I'm remembering that correctly. And it was on the north side of the freeway, the Mercado. There was a movie theater, a couple of restaurants, and a Starbucks. So that's where that was. I don't know if it's still there. Might be. So we were sitting there, myself and a friend of mine, and we were talking about a startup idea that we were mulling over. And I could not help but notice that people sitting at nearby tables were craning a little bit to catch a detail or two about what we were discussing. I wrote discussion because I don't know how to type. No, I get this. It's kind of weird. I don't have like proper touch typing technique, but I kind of do a computer programmer's version of it. And I will often like get distracted and not have the correct form of a word, or I'll have a typo or something. I comment on that frequently, but not always. So this was this craning, people kind of leaning over, kind of tilting their head a little bit, getting the ear closer. It was not about theft, or it wasn't about theft or anything really. It wasn't. I didn't feel. This was sort of the normal thing. You kind of expected this. I would guess there were several tables in this place, in the Starbucks, with similar conversations happening, with similar, attention. So, what are they talking about? What's something going on? Some possibility? Some new thing? So yeah, I wasn't even concerned for a moment because there were so many people doing so many things. I think it was the sort of the equivalent of putting a moistened finger into the air to catch where the wind is blowing, right? So it just kind of helped. And this was before LinkedIn. It was before a lot of what we take for granted today about casual communications, social networking and whatnot. So I think it was just sort of checking the weather. So people were curious to learn about possibilities around them, what's going on, like I said, the wind, the weather. Who knows? Someone overhearing something might be a co-founder within a week. That was the nature of things back then. On the other hand, in the middle period when I was in Phoenix, so between 2001 and 2005, that's where I grew up, so I kind of moved back home, so to speak. I lived in a part of town that, when I lived there, was absolute desert, so now it was developed. It was like terraformed Mars. I found myself having a conversation in a coffee shop again with someone about something entrepreneurial. And I realized, like a light bulb lighting above us, that nobody around us cared, not even a little bit, not at all. I often described this comparison by saying we could have been whispering in Silicon Valley and still would have had people craning to catch an audio glimpse, if you like. While in Phoenix, I could have yelled the idea, it was like, hey, here's the idea, and I would surely have been shushed, or worse. You're going to have to leave with outbursts like that. But I wanted to announce my startup idea so somebody could try to steal it. Like, yeah, we don't need that here. Go. The weird thing, the Phoenix area had and still has a rather substantial tech sector, for example. So semiconductors, electronics assembly, and government contracting. Think McDonnell Douglas, General Dynamics, Hughes, so Apache helicopters and F-16s and all kinds of stuff like that were the big three back then. And then genetics and some other stuff have joined the mix since. And I've said this before, Phoenix is not a bad candidate for the legitimate next Silicon Valley if there is going to be one. And it's still not a good goal, and there really shouldn't be a next Silicon Valley. It should be a better version of where you are. But anyway, back then the culture was maybe a little bit spread out, maybe more old school. So Phoenix was definitely, government contracting. You got to have security clearances and whatnot, and semiconductors were, Intel was there. I did work at Intel when I was living in Phoenix that time, but Motorola, Phoenix, Honeywell. So there's a lot of old school companies. Leading edge was not necessarily first thing to come to mind. I think things have evolved since, and that really began to happen as TGen, translational genomics, was a building, and this was happening while I lived there. They broke ground on a facility, so on. So pull that pin out from college from earlier in the episode and look at these two scenarios I have described. When you find yourself surrounded by interesting and interested people, there's that word pair again, you will encounter more intellectual curiosity and more head tilts at the question, would you like to participate? Do you want to get in on this? Do you have something to bring to this? Do you want to join? You want to scoot your chair over? Whatever the topic might be. It might not even be a startup. It might just be something that sounds interesting. Even people already pursuing a startup were inclined to want to know more because they might know someone who might be interested, or they might have something that they are working on or know about, maybe somebody else is working on, that would fit into this opportunity. So maybe someone to join, a referral to, hey, I have a friend who's looking, or I have a friend who's working on something that might work with, you want to talk to him about a business possibility, collaboration. A culture of innovation is fueled by, and at the same time fuels, a tendency to be curious and even proactive about learning more, possibly because opportunity may come along at any time in any shape and size, and there may be a real possibility wrapped in that opportunity, or maybe a real opportunity wrapped in that possibility, vice versa. A college campus similar to MUD or Caltech or MIT or any of the non-trivial number of campuses around the US and around the world, maybe this would be more true a couple of years ago, will have a higher density of these personalities, but a place like Silicon Valley was pretty full, and your locality might be too. By the way, the culture of innovation in the Silicon Valley area started forming in the gold rush days, 1849. If you don't believe me, I did an entire episode of the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program, episode 85, and we looked at this a lot. To be a better Vegas. Don't try to be the next Silicon Valley, be a better Vegas. Why? Because Silicon Valley took a century more to form. You don't just sprinkle money on top and it happens. And you certainly don't post on LinkedIn and change the whole place around. Vegas, though, not so much. Vegas does not have a strong culture of innovation in my view. And by the way, does this mean that there's nobody doing anything innovative here? Absolutely not. There are people doing innovative things here. They tend not to be the types that will lean over and listen in and maybe say, oh, I think can I learn more? They tend to keep to themselves. They're like, oh yeah, you do you. Good luck with that. I'm going to be over here doing my thing. You be over there doing your thing. Never the twain shall meet. So what is going on in Vegas? My view. Through the lens of civic tech, or now civic volunteerism, Vegas has not been strong. I'm sad to say it. Code for Vegas was, from the co-founder and co-captain, who sat on our board of directors when we rebooted 4 years ago for a year. He was a part of kind of rebooting and getting us going. He recounted the tales of getting Code for Vegas up and running many years, almost a decade prior, I should say. A lot of people signing up for the meetups, but only about 4 people really doing the work that they were pursuing. Some of this work enabled the Open Data Project, which persists today. If you look for Open Data Las Vegas, I think that'll get you there. The ArcGIS hosted government data portal. And there are a few different components, the GeoCommons, the Open Government, Open Checkbook or whatever it is, and then LVMPD, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, and the Regional Transportation Commission. There are several several portals also hanging off of ArcGIS. So there's a ton of open data. Well, that was started by Code for Vegas, working with Code for America and the city of Las Vegas way back probably like 12 or 15 years ago by now. Other efforts seem to have withered early with low or no interest. So in other words, there was the open data platform that they were working on, but everything else kind of, people really didn't show up for it. There had to be some external drive, perhaps. This is a travesty, to be honest, because like a demographic or a demographic collapse, all the people that were interested back then disappeared. So we have a giant gap where there was nobody considering civic volunteerism, which is, it's like the superset of civic tech where you're like, hey, I have skills and interests and I would like to make my surroundings better and help people in some way. And sort of like volunteering. But in this case, you're taking a structured approach to it. You're like, hey, let's build something or let's design something. Let's interact with the public and make some situation better, etc. So it's a little bit more structured. There's more of a goal. It's not like volunteering for winter related like food drives and whatnot. Those are sort of episodic. Civic volunteerism in this context, what we're doing with the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, has more of story arcs, right? Like many weeks, months, years of effort by many people in different capacities and so on. So it's a bigger scope, a lot more grandeur, which is where a culture of innovation comes in handy. And again, it's a travesty that this sort of took a break and the pandemic didn't help by any means. If you do dive into the Cafe Genius Impresarios series, so I'm kind of plugging my own separate thing. I usually don't do that for this program, but they do cross paths very specifically here. You will get a lot more detail about all this, but again, through the lens of civic volunteerism, Vegas suffers somewhat empirically, so I've picked this up directly myself, from what's in it for me syndrome, coupled with show me what you got, barriers to entry. In other words, hey, I'm working on something. Well, why don't you come back when you have something to show me? I don't want to work on your startup idea. I'm too busy looking for free food at meetups. Yeah, I know. I say that all the time. What's in it for me? Is there free food? That was something I heard from people when we were putting together our monthly hackathon meetups. Is there going to be free food? I've experienced both of these. Again, what's in it for me? Show me what you got. Directly with Innovate for Vegas Foundation, and to a lesser extent with my own entrepreneurial innovation efforts, which I talk about more in the other program if you're interested. So, Cafe Genius Impresarios. Suffice to say, we appear to be where Phoenix was before they accepted the big three areas. Before they escaped the big three areas and, kind of expanded the scope and grandeur of what they were looking at with TGen, as I mentioned, translational genomics. And they were building their facilities, and the universities and community college, the Maricopa County Community College system, introduced a bunch of vocational training programs for lab technicians and so on. And then the universities had biotech research, and U of A Medical already had some biotechnology. NAU had a pre-med program that was pretty reasonable. ASU had more systems. Anyway, so they had a full press bringing genetic engineering, genetic technology, research, and so on to this area. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on now. So Phoenix has really evolved over the years, in my opinion. So everybody was gearing up for this, the genetics industry to land. And I often say that Vegas needs about 10 years of pro-action to affect some change, to cultivate a culture of innovation. And that is if we start today. I don't know that this is going to happen at scale, so we do our part and we'll see what happens. So we can innovate in our corner of the greater Vegas area, and fingers crossed. Maybe we'll inspire. So this is the final point. The Smarter Smart City Challenge, which you may or may not have heard of by the time you're listening to this, is an initiative we kicked off in February of 2026 to last through the year into January of 2027 to maximize the possibility of participation. We have touched on some of this in recent episodes, and we will more in future episodes, but suffice to say, for now, by opening up this form of engagement to everyone without age limitations, without a practical time limitation, so this is not a hackathon weekend, it's this weekend or you can't participate, right? It's all through the year. Participate when you want, and we'll put together some events and so on. But anytime you want, on your schedule. So we don't want to limit participation based on availability and time flexibility. So anytime. The goal is to have participation, not to offer a limited supply. It's only these 3 days. And no constraints on topics or formats. Just about anything goes, with obvious caveats for safety and audience appropriateness, which appropriateness is an actual word, by the way. So you don't have to write some code. You could literally build a presentation. You could build a physical model. You could create a sculpture. It could be anything. The sky's the limit. And we intend to discover just how many of the 2.3 million, maybe it's 2.4, I can't remember, who live in Clark County or Southern Nevada, how many of them have an innovator mindset. Fingers remain crossed, but we have been off to a very dismal beginning as I'm recording this episode. So we're 24 days in now. It's 12:02 in the morning. We're 24 days in since we commenced our early sign-up period, and we've got zero interest. We've had zero people reaching out. Using LinkedIn to try to reach people like teachers and local media and so on has been a disappointment. And I think it is quite literally show me what you got syndrome, right? Oh, you're just getting this started? Well, I'll come back later and see how you're coming along at the end. When we facilitated the NASA Space Apps Challenge in 2023, I reached out to local press and I said, would you be interested in mentioning this in a brief human interest story about local students pursuing a SPAT? It's the biggest hackathon in the world. It takes place every October on a weekend, so it's a weekend hackathon. And they said, it might be more interesting at the end. And I said, right, well, if you wait till the end, then nobody will know about it, which is why we had 12 people participating. Silicon Valley had 250, and Indirabad, India had 1,500 people participating. Culture of innovation. People become interested and want to learn more. They may want to participate. They're interested and interesting. So this is a challenge for the greater Vegas area, and it's something that is part of our mission. It certainly fits into our purpose, because more people that want to spend their time being creative and innovative and pointing that innovation, that mindset towards community elevation. I could try to start a startup, but I can also take a little bit of time, sometime, and look at my surroundings. Like, you know what? Why does that not work? The famous example, a community in the southeastern part of the Vegas area, not actually in the city of Las Vegas, they had potholes and they were taking forever to get fixed. So they just decided to fix them themselves. So let's explore why that happened, right? So you can put together a presentation for county and city, county commission, city councils. Here's what we encountered, and here's how you can make it better. Here's how you can shorten the repair time and the turnaround between reporting and repair. That's just one teeny tiny example. So people can look around, and if they have the innovator mindset and they want to point that effort towards community elevation around, where they live, they could actually solve real problems. And guess what? Everybody wins. So we'll see if we can get over, maybe there will be people saying, I would do it, but what's in it for me? Is there going to be free food? We'll see. Anyway, that's the story this week. Hopefully you found this interesting, and maybe you're even motivated to check it out. The website is Smart City Vegas, and you can go to our website and find a link to it, and we'll go from there. Take care now. Thanks for listening. As always, thank you for your support and maybe even participation at some point. Enjoy. Bye-bye.